Good morning and welcome back. Today we are on day 151 in our 365 days of Bible study. At the moment we are looking at the statutes and laws of Old Israel, and particularly at the laws relating to human behaviour towards God and worship. And today this particular part of Deuteronomy is talking about the provision that is to be made for the priesthood. Deuteronomy chapter 18 verses 1 to 8. I'll turn you around so you can see the text. Moses says, "The tribe of Levi is a tribe of priests, and it will not have an allocation of land in Israel. To compensate them for this, they will be allowed to live off the offerings and sacrifices given to Yahweh. They are not allowed to own land as other tribes do. Their share is the honour of being Yahweh's priests, as he promised. So whenever people bring cattle or sheep to be sacrificed, the priests can keep the shoulder, jowls and stomach. They can also keep the first portion of corn, wine, oil and wool. Yahweh chose the tribe of Levi out of all your tribes to serve as priests forever. Any Levite who chooses to do so may come from wherever he lives to the one place where Yahweh is worshipped, and he can serve there as one of Yahweh your God's priests, just like the other Levites serving there. He is entitled to the same food as the other priests, and he can also keep any proceeds his family sends him." During the times of the patriarchs, before Israel went into Egypt and became slaves there, sacrifices were made to God on an informal basis. There was no priesthood yet, and it appears that firstborn sons were particularly looked upon as favoured by God, and they did the sacrifices. The survivors of the Exodus wandered in the wilderness for 2 generations before beginning to settle in the Promised Land, and the first 5 books of the Bible tell us that it was during that nomadic period that Moses brought them God's law, and that priesthood and worship at one unique shrine were established. The one unique shrine, first of all, was the box in which God's laws were carried, the so-called Ark of the Covenant. Then the shrine became associated with the tent, known as the meeting tent or tabernacle, in which the ark resided at the camp boundary, wherever they rested on their travels. But as we saw back on day 16, there had been some trouble with the firstborn sons, and from their supporters a challenge to Moses' authority, which led to the tribe of Levi superseding them as the group chosen to offer sacrifices. None of this actually prevented members of Levite families from having secular jobs, of course, and most of them did. Those who carried the ark in the wilderness and who served in the meeting tent, and their descendants who staffed the Jerusalem temple, however, were professional clergy. They would have been too busy to make a living elsewhere, and here today we see provision being made for their upkeep, at least as far as feeding them was concerned. All the male members of the tribe were regarded as priests, and provision is here made also for visiting priests to the Jerusalem temple to be accorded the same honours as those living there. This provision was probably not amongst the original regulations, but was more likely added once the question arose and the Jerusalem temple was up and running. Even today, when non-Levites often take the role of rabbi, it is still male members of the clan of Levi who pronounce the Aaronic blessing and receive the 5 gold coins at the birth of a Jewish family's firstborn son. in early Christianity, the apostles at first returned to their old jobs, largely fishing, and St. Paul, after his conversion, made his way financially by sewing leather tents, and was proud of never having been a financial drain on the church. But it soon became clear that the preaching of the good news was too much of a priority for secular jobs to stand in the way. And Paul's advice to Timothy in 1 Timothy 5:17-18 was to make sure that those early Christian preachers and the leaders of the congregation under his jurisdiction should not only be honoured, but also paid. But all through history, the parish clergy had some freedom to make a little on the side, perhaps by being smallholders to provide their own food, or as teachers to give the young a start on their education, while still, as a priority, providing worship and pastoral care for their parishioners. It was only in the 20th century that the experiment of worker priests was tried, at first in France, where the priest's priority was explicitly to be a worker amongst workers, to bring the gospel closer to those who would otherwise have dismissed it as irrelevant. And nowadays, it is not unusual in Anglican parishes to experience the valuable ministry of priests and lay ministers who have secular jobs and are not paid by the church except to cover their expenses. And many of them do eventually become parish clergy, fully supported by the church. Tomorrow, another piece of scripture that might well be a piece of hindsight on the part of the later editors of Deuteronomy. We shall see Moses promising that God will send prophets to his people to keep them on the straight and narrow, and we'll look forward to doing that tomorrow.